Welcome everybody to another podcast of the Grants and Government Contracting Podcast here. It's awesome to be here with all of you. If you are joining us live, welcome to the podcast. And if you're watching this on replay, it's great to see you on replay as well. Today, we have a lot of interesting things to talk about, and we're going to be looking at a case study about an organization called CASA. And so we're going to be looking at the CASA growth model, what they got right, what are they doing, what are their funding strategies, and how you can learn from their success and some of their challenges to implement into your organization as well. So I have a special co-host with me today. My regular co-host, Lainey, she is not here with me. And so I have a special co-host. Her name is Della Lago. She's going to be going into the case study with CASA. So we're going to be diving into that in a second. If you're joining us live, if you could put in the chat area your organization and where you're joining us from, that would be awesome. Gives us to kind of see a little bit who's joining us today here in our live podcast. I am your host. My name is Abraham Shong. And again, welcome to the Grants and Contracts podcast. With us today, we will be talking about what CASA, what they got right, their funding strategies, how to build a sustainable organization. We're going to be looking at what are some replicable things that you can do to model after them. And then we're going to talk about some secrets in terms of their branding, their stories, and their messaging about their mission, their motto, and their money. And then we're going to talk about how you can model yourself after some of these principles and some of the things that they put in place. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So with that, along this podcast here, if you have questions or comments, you can put it in the chat area. That will be we'll address some of your questions as well. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce everybody to Della, who is joining us here. Della is a nonprofit leader, and she has been in the nonprofit world for a while, and she is very closely has roots back to CASA. So we're going to be looking at that as a case model. So Della, welcome to the Grants and Contract Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I know you have a passion for the nonprofit world. So tell me a little bit about who you are and how you got into the nonprofit world.
Well, I thought I was going to become a CPA, but that quickly changed as I was called to ministry and worked in everything from churches to free clinics, food pantries, CASA. I'm working now at a transitional housing facility, do grant reporting, grant writing, all of those kind of things. My heart is really around the small to medium nonprofits because they're just boots on the ground. And I just have such a passion for the work and the impact that these organizations and volunteers make in each community.
Hmm. So why is that close to your heart? The small to medium nonprofit organization, why is that close to you?
Because I think, as most of your listeners would attest, uh, you don't have the funding and you don't have the time as you're building and dreaming and growing this new work. Um, and so you need to really rely on community. That's what I love about GovCon community is, access to the different minds and the different resources that are available there. Um, I have my lane and I do it well, but there's so many different pieces that come up that where I need to tap into some of those other uh, streams of information, like this podcast, which
Hmm.
has been so helpful to me. And so the work, when they're really on the ground doing that hard work, is to have somebody who can come alongside of them and say, you stay focused on what you're doing and doing well, and let me come alongside you and just help you with that piece. Um, I just love that. That inspires me. Really, it helps me get up in the morning and say, I'm ready to do it again.
Hmm. Yeah, and for me, I understand that it is the big nonprofit, right? They have board of directors that is part of billion-dollar corporations. They have seasoned professionals. They have Congress. They have former political people on their boards and so forth. So they don't need, or they don't have the same pain point as new organizations or small nonprofit organizations. So that's, these small organizations are close to my heart because, I love to champion these organizations and help them to go from one place to the next. And I feel
Yeah.
like, to me, that's more meaningful versus being tied to a large organization where you're just a number, and you may receive a $10,000 contribution, but out of a $200 million budget, that's nothing, right? In a small organization, if they receive a $10,000 grant or funding, that means so much. That moves a needle in their small organization. So that's kind of close to my heart for that reason there. So
Well, and you mentioned something that really always strikes me, that I think the small nonprofits don't realize they actually do better, um, as storytelling. They
mhm,
are so connected within their community, and they don't feel like they really know how to tell their stories, but they do. The larger organizations do a really good job of storytelling, but it can feel a little more canned and commercialized, where
mhm.
when you've got these small groups, boy, they just, you hear it in their voice, you see it in the faces. It's powerful. That is such a powerful tool that they have in their arsenal. So
Yeah, that's a very great point there, and that kind of leads us into what we're going to be talking about today. So, if you're just joining us, thank you for joining us. We'll be talking about a case study about an organization called CASA. So, let's go ahead and dive into this here. So, tell me, what is CASA, and what do they do?
well, and that I think is what been one of the key factors when I started as their executive director from our local program, Enota Casa here in Georgia. We serve 4 counties, and I served with them for 6 years. Was getting the message out. What is CASA? And they've done a very good job at streamlining and clarifying that message into just very simple, easy to replicate for any volunteer, anybody who's a part of the organization. And that is that they court appointed special advocate. That's what the CASA stands for. And these are community volunteers that are screened and trained uh, around all of the areas for child dependency, which is children in foster care, so that they can advocate for the best interests of those children. And so these volunteers are directly serving children in their community who are experiencing foster care. Simple as that. So everything around what CASA does has to focus in on that mission. And for your listeners, I would say if you don't do anything, have that, I think we used to call it an elevator speech, have that snippet nailed down so that it's repeatable over and over, so that your board members hear it. Everybody hears that same message over and over until it becomes really just a part of your tagline.
Hmm. So, can you share about how CASA got started and what is their story and what is their message to their constituents and to their funders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it started like most nonprofits start. A judge realized there was such a need for him to have more information around a juvenile dependency case. And they after starting and stopping with several different tries, the model became, let's get community volunteers to be sworn in as officers of the court, focus on this one case, and gather as much information about this case as it relates to a list of best interest factors for these children. And what that began happening was the power of that information, the drive towards those best interest factors of really focusing on the child and what is best for that child. Uh, they saw then the outcomes. And while anecdotally they saw improvement in outcomes, what the organization began to do is create evidence based models and tracking those outcomes. From those outcomes became, we knew nationally then, someone that had a child that had a CASA volunteer did better in education. A child that had a CASA volunteer received the medical treatment that they needed. It didn't get missed. And most importantly, that child achieved permanency faster, which means they didn't languish in foster care. They were able to get into a home, start building their lives, and changing that child's story from a child in foster care to now a child in a permanent, loving, and stable home. And no matter which way you come around that, if you're driving everything towards those outcomes, you're going to win every time. And so that's one thing I think they did very well, was clarify, clarify, clarify. So if I'm tracking any information, how does that information impact my mission and why we're doing what we do? Which takes me to another point. A very good friend of ours, Steve Shepard, he is the development director for a local university here. And he said, Della, if you do anything, I want you and your staff and your board to read Start With Why. That's that book. It was, I think, in the early 2000s, maybe 2009, 2010, with Simon Sinek, Sinek. I can't remember how to say his name.
Yeah.
But oldie but goodie, I will tell you. So everything we did, we kept saying, what is your why? Why are you doing this? Why am I capturing this data? Why am I telling these stories? And I just say, go back to the basics of why you're doing the work that you're doing, whether it's feeding people, mentoring people, housing people, whatever that is. Go back to that why, because that's the passion that started that nonprofit, and that's what's going to sustain you long term. Mm-hmm. And then everything we build around that should help tell that story, should help build that foundation. And so that's what CASA has done very well, is make sure everything they're doing is surrounding and supporting that goal, that mission.
Mm-hmm. So they've done a great job of organizing volunteers. And so let me make sure I'm clear on this here. So the pain point is you have youths. Most of them are, children that doesn't have a home, and so they need foster care. And then the court appoint a special advocate on their behalf, maybe a mentor to some degree, or instead of a caseworker, it's a special advocate, right? Because the term caseworker is very different from a special advocate, right?
Right. So the caseworker would be somebody, what we call in Georgia DFACS, Department of Family and Children Services. They come into care because there's evidence of child abuse and neglect. So the caseworker, the case manager, has a case for the whole family. And while the safety of that child and reunification is critical, sometimes what happens is we start seeing other things that need to happen in that case, and the best interest of the child can often be lost, or the case manager is running 30 to 40 other cases. And so that volunteer who is solely focused on that one child is such a powerful tool in this juvenile justice model, because that one volunteer, that's all they're focused on, is that one case. And so they get information and they know a lot that maybe that case manager doesn't have time or even the capacity. We know they're overrun as it is to keep up with. And so that volunteer really makes sure that everybody at the table has all the same information.
So tell me, how did they build up a core of volunteers? Because that there's some things to learn from that. Because that's where a lot of nonprofits struggle, right? Usually the founder is doing all the work. They have a board that does it. Sometimes the board helps out, but sometimes the board just shows up to, from a fiduciary responsibility only. They don't necessarily volunteer to do the mission of the organization. They may help out with other administrative or some funding side of it, but not the work itself. So how did CASA go out there and build out a base of volunteers?
Again, a clear message about why what we're doing is important. They are very clear as to what the expectations are, what training needs to be done, how many times you need to visit the child.
Mm-hmm.
And so for CASA, it's very clearly articulated. But if you are building a brand new, or you're in the early stages of a nonprofit, I'll be honest with you, sometimes the easiest way to do it is when someone says, hey, I believe in what you do. How can I help? You need to look at that person and say, I don't know that I know. Can we sit and talk about it? And then you tell me what talents you have, and you will be amazed at simply taking the time. And I know most of y'all are like me, you've hit the ground running. And so when you're trying to build something and I need help, but I don't know what that help looks like, you'll be amazed at how those volunteers will step up and say, you know what I can do? I can create a checklist for that anybody can use. I can do some research on a donor database. I can look into or help you build out your board or gather forms. Those foundational pieces that you're going to need in the early stages. As you grow and you've been in your business for a while, in your nonprofit sector for a while, you're going to have a lot better understanding of what your needs are. And so clearly identifying where people can plug in is key, because not everybody can do the work of a court-appointed special advocate. It's a unique model. And so it means you're committed to that one case for at least 1 to 2 years. You're visiting that child once a month. And you're preparing court reports. You go to court. So again, there's a commitment there. Which would look very different from someone who is sorting food and handing out food at a food pantry, or preparing to do mentoring one-on-one. The variety of things and services that we provide, working with animals, whatever it could be. And so at that point, you need to let that volunteer know what those expectations are, and don't be afraid to tell them, we require this, because I will guarantee you most people will step up to the plate. And if they can't, they'll tell you, and that's going to save you a lot of heartache.
Mm-hmm. So the volunteers have to, one, understand the purpose and the why, and then they have to buy into that. And then once they understand the mission and the purpose, then they can really roll up their sleeve and get actively involved in that regard. I love the one-on-one type of model, because in that situation, the true need of the person, of the child, can really be addressed. Now, so the volunteers are volunteer, they don't get paid. Do they get maybe some reimbursement for travel costs, or does CASA support some of those, or are those just on the volunteer itself?
And that depends on the actual program itself, what funding, because there is a national CASA organization, and there's even a state organization, but each program, it's its own affiliate, and it is its own 501c3. So that particular program is going to decide, do they have the funding to reimburse mileage? Our program did not have enough funds to reimburse all mileage. So we said, after so many miles, we'll reimburse up to, this many miles, because we're finding children, due to the lack of foster homes, were being placed further and further and further apart. And we didn't want the cost of fuel to be a barrier for advocacy for that. But the other part of that is getting them to report in their volunteer hours and their miles. Somebody like, no, I don't need to keep track of that. Well, part of that model is letting them know that expectation, I need that information, because that's how I present the story and get funding for our program. Because if you weren't doing that volunteer work, it wouldn't get done, or we'd have to pay somebody to do it. And so that's an impact, a financial impact into this community, which goes back to the structure that we were talking about, and really helping your volunteers know the why, not
Mhm.
just of what they're doing, but every little piece, why I want you to track those hours, why I want you to track that mileage, that then impacts that greater picture and our sustainability, one of the things
Mhm.
we're talking about. And if everybody understands why it's not busy work, they
Mhm.
understand why you're asking them to go through a couple of extra steps, they're more than happy to do it. And they're willing to then spread the message to the other volunteers and team members as to, yeah, this is why this is important.
Yeah, I love that, in the sense that when part of the messaging to potential donors, potential grants, to receive that, you have to give them numbers, right? Metrics and the impact. And if you're not tracking that, then you can't tell the story. You can't say, this is Billy Bob, or this is Susie, or this is whoever the child is. If you don't have the metrics and you can't put numbers in a face and use that as part of your storytelling, then it doesn't move the heart, it doesn't move the emotions, it doesn't
Mhm.
move people to actually do something to support the nonprofit and the mission of what they're trying to do. So let's talk a little about the funding side of it. How, from a general perspective, how much funding does CASA receive? And they have a model of the national and then the different local nonprofits that's all closely aligned with each other. Tell me a little about the national funding model and then the local funding model, and approximately how much funding do they receive?
Well, one of the first things that a CASA program, especially if they're starting out, they, because of the model that we're doing, we qualify for Victims of Crime Act, VOCA, VOCA, Victims of Crime Act funds. And a lot of your nonprofits would probably qualify for that. And what that means is they would need to go to their county and apply for the local victims assistance fund, usually around 5%. Once you qualify for that, you can get county funding from the fees and other uh, charges that are assessed to in the court system that people pay. Percentages of that money then go. The reason those fees are paid, it goes into the Crime Act fund, which then is turned around and dispersed back into that community for services like what we're doing, child advocacy, domestic violence, all of those kind of things. So that's a key part in structure, is making sure that you are attaining those certifications, applications. I know GovCon is great about that. If you haven't taken classes with ABE yet, please do, to walk you through what some of that looks like, and making sure that you got all those boxes checked, because when it comes time to apply for those Victims of Crime Act funding, that's where a lot of the CASA programs get the majority of their funding. And then from taking that step, you get the county funding. You can then apply for some other federal and state grants. And then from there, you've already done all the hard work. And when you go then to apply for other grant funding through local nonprofits, local electric fund, utility companies, things like that, you've already got all that data there, and you're ready to go. So nothing is wasted when you begin to gather and compile all of that work. So I would suggest, if you think you might could qualify for victims assistance funds, start that process now, and that will really give you a leg up.
So CASA, they receive millions and millions of grants and funding from different organizations. I'm looking at their 990, and they've been around for a while. And so 2023, they generated 10.4 million in funding, um, which is for a small organization, that's amazing. And most organization, they're just trying to say, hey, I just want to get to 100,000.
Right. Now, understand what I did in the local program would not come anywhere near that. But if you're talking about, let's just say, a $300,000 budget, which is still a pretty good size,
Mhm.
75% of that coming from grant funding at that level, that's significant.
Mhm. Now let's talk about the because the organization you were tied to is based in Georgia. Let's talk about how CASA received funding from the state of Georgia. Can you go dive a little bit more into that and how they use that strategy?
Well, CASA has a great model in terms of your local programs can apply for support from the state level as well as the national CASA level, which helps with sustainability, capacity building, and things like that. So those organizations are really centered around growing the local program. And because of that, in Georgia, our Georgia CASA, and if you want to learn more about them, it's Georgia CASA. I think it's GACASA.org. Great organization. They do a wonderful job with advocacy and lobbying at the state level, which means that their message is very clear. They even have a CASA day at the Capitol. They share openly and often with the governor's office and other state and local representatives the work that they do. And they then engage local programs like that I was a part of in sharing with our representatives, our state representatives, the impact and the story and the financial impact it has in the community. And then what does it look like if we're not doing that work, and why we need them to stand in the gap for funding and other things like that, and sometimes even get creative with how to continue to fund the program. And after years of doing this work, the governor's office actually put in, I think it was $1.8 million in the budget for CASA. Very brand new. That is huge for a state like Georgia, where we are really struggling, and only about half of the children have an advocate. And we know that these children that have that advocate are going to achieve permanency faster. And we do that. It costs money for these children to stay in foster care. So we want to do whatever we can to get them out of the system and into a permanent, safe, loving home. And that consistency in storytelling, advocacy, messaging, that we would constantly get emails that say, okay, it's time to tell the story. It's time to say what would happen if we're not here. And it's powerful. It is powerful.
Hmm. Well, that is amazing to have the impact that will garner the attention of the governor's office to where they
Mhm,
would write into the state budget
mhm.
about $1.8 million a year. Uh, when we talk about sustainability in terms of program and program growth, sustainability in terms of the mission, sustainability in terms of the in this case here, the children and their needs are being met. But sustainability only happens if you have the proper funding in place, right? And so sustainability really comes back to funding. Sustainability itself that uh, the grants or the resources are renewable, and to where you do the work once and it
Yes.
continues to come in. That's really what we mean by sustainability. And so when it comes to funding, telling the story, doing advocacy work on behalf of the foster care children, but as well as advocacy work with your state legislators and the different government, whether it's at the local level or at the state level, and even at the federal level, so that they hear your story. Now, if you get funding from the counties or the cities, their budgets are tighter. If you get funding from the state, their budget is a little bit healthier. If you get funding from the federal government and they write you in on a recurring budget, part of their agency budget, that's powerful. So this situation, $1.8 million is amazing in terms of coming to CASA to help further the mission itself. Now, let's talk about let's once the organization they go about their they get the funding, they get the volunteers, they're supporting the programs that they have. What are some of the obligations and what are some of the reporting requirements that they have to do to stay in compliance so that the grantors are satisfied and the grantors want to continue to work with them?
I think that is a brilliant question, because after you've done all that hard work and gathered all that data, and then you submitted it and you get the funding, you're like, yay. And then you think, oh no, there's all these other reporting and other information. It is crucial, let me just tell you, because I have even seen some CASA programs not have the structure in terms of gathering data and reporting data, actually not spend down all of their funds. So it is very important that you have a timeline, that you have a structure for sustainability, meaning that, again, those volunteers know every month they're going to be asked to give their hours and miles. My staff would know, hey, you're going to need to give me your number of children served, number of children who have yet to have a volunteer, all of those various, any number, any data that you can capture. You need to start building immediately a process to sustain that and to capture that data over time. Because I will tell you, even negative outcomes are good information. Because I was able to say during COVID, the difference between before COVID and during COVID, the drop was so dramatic. Then after several years after COVID, we saw some of those permanency and re-entries to foster care coming back. And even now, I can say, when there was not the level of advocacy we needed, these same children are now re-entering again. So that is why your funding for me is important. So when I give you a 6-month report or whatever, I want them to know, I know that without their funding, we would not be able to achieve these results. So you have got to gather all of that information. And when you do gather that information, your private donors, your local agencies, your civic groups, your community foundations, and you're able to provide that information to them, you're already giving it to your federal and state funders for the government grants. But when you're able to provide that to other grantors, it gives you such a level of credibility that they're going to know the next time they offer another grant opportunity and you apply, they're going to remember, okay, this program reported on time. They gave us everything they asked for. They know what we're asking for. And I know y'all have talked about that a lot in this podcast, about how to really present the information. And it is crucial. I cannot say enough. Reporting that information, keeping on top of your expenses, keeping on top of your reimbursements and the story behind those. Every quarter, every month, I would ask my team, tell me an impact story. What happened, good or bad? We didn't have a CASA on this case and this child's already re-entered. This is why we need you to volunteer. This is why we need your funding. This is why we need to train more. Every bit of information is another catalyst for me to tell that story about why their engagement with us and them funding us is so critical. And so don't think of it as busy work. Don't think of it as I'm off mission. This isn't what I signed up to do. It is foundational to the work that you do to track all of that and to report it. Again, it goes back to credibility. They know if you're always late reporting and everything else, they're going to say, oh, we're going to have to fight with them and we could give more money to this one. And then, think about those things. The people are the ones that are making those decisions, and they know how you respond and how your organization behaves with them. And it does matter.
Mm-hmm. So it's not busy work or it's not grunt work. It's funding work, right?
Absolutely is. It is, again, part of the sustainability of your funding. Because if you do not engage with that grantor with the highest level of excellence, and you have the potential to get ongoing funding from them, you may have just shot yourself in the foot, so to speak.
Mhm.
You have got to do not just the front end, but the middle and the end, do the whole thing well. If you do that, they're going to trust you with their money again.
Mhm. Yeah, that trust factor is very important, and trust comes from people knowing the good, bad, and ugly, right? Because you can't
Yes.
really have trust if everything if you ju- if you're ju- if you're just painting everything as perfect. You also need to be vulnerable in terms of, hey, these are our challenges, these are our needs. This is where we fail because of a lack of funding, or this is where the shortfall may not be a failure, but these are the shortfall because of the lack of funding. So when a potential funder, whether it's a individual donor, a corporation, or any other type of agencies out there, if they understand your true needs, from the good, bad, and ugly, they can really step in to do something about it. And so don't just tell them the nice and pretty picture. Yes, you need to have that as well, but you also need to just be real and raw with people, and people will buy into that. That's where really what trust comes in. So let's shift gears a little bit, and CASA's been around for a while now, and they've had great success. They built multiple chapters all throughout the U.S., working with the core systems and so forth. Now, more recently, they've run into some funding issues. Can you talk a little about that there, um, and there's some lessons to be learned from that as well?
Absolutely. So if some of your listeners have read in the national news, their national funding from the Department of Justice was frozen, and a lot of that's been happening during this time period of these first 100 days of Trump. And so they're really questioning a lot of the grant funding. So National CASA received a pause on all their Department of Justice funding. What that meant is at a state level, any of the state organizations that received funding from National CASA, their programs funding had to stop, whatever was related to that. Our local program, for example, I had written a grant and received a $25,000 grant from National CASA for recruitment, which is basically a capacity building grant. So $25,000, we were so excited, and then boom, we got the call. I think it was April 22nd or something, and said we're not going. The funds are frozen. What they did was wonderful, and then what our state organization did was wonderful. They immediately notified us all. And through that, they said, we're going to have a call and we're going to all talk about it. But also, here's your call to action.
Mhm.
So at Georgia CASA, for example, immediately get a reach out from the executive director there, who said, tell us what you've accomplished so far with the funds you have received, and tell us what impact this is going to have on your continued movement forward in the program. So again, knowing already how to tell that story, so that as we go out and look for additional funding, we can say, this is the impact. We're ready, so that call to action, immediately asking us to reach out to our representatives, our state and federal representatives, reaching out to the governor, reaching out to congressmen, having all of that ready to go, is going to help. And remember, see, that came from years of already doing this work here at the state level, to get the funding through the state, the governor's office. So I also have that information ready, because there's going to be a call to action for our other donors. Hey, we've lost this funding. In order for us to continue, we need your help. Can you dig a little deeper? Can you do this? And so diversifying your funding is what's going to be critical. And while we get 75% ish funding in a local CASA program like the one I was a part of through the government contract, I still have to raise an additional 25%. So I have got to have various streams of funding. And I track all of that. I track individuals, churches, civic groups, community foundations, literally tracking everything so we know which areas we need to increase and build. And it's just very crucial that you're ready for any kind of immediate pause like this, that you're still tracking. You may still have accumulated expenses. Track that. Track the percentage of time that your staff members are spending on that project, even though that funding may be paused, because you don't know, in 6 months, they may go back retroactive and say, we're going to reimburse 50% of what's left.
Mm-hmm.
So don't ever just say, oh, we're done. Keep tracking it, because that storytelling, that reaching out to your your legislative officials can make an impact, but it may be 8 months down the road. It may be a year from now. But if you can go back and gather that information, you're going to get that money.
Mm-hmm.
So I just say, don't see it as a wasted opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so CASA's funding was frozen due to some of the budget reallocation, budget cuts at the federal level, and that permeates through state and local as well. And so it's really not due to anything they did, but it was just more, with Doge and Trump's administration, as they're going through, how do we adjust and how do we decrease our debt as a nation. But then they had some contingencies in place. They put together some immediate action to help ensure that every organizations, all of their local branches or local CASA groups have some specific action plan to take. But let's talk about diversification, because this is where a lot of nonprofits go wrong, right? Where they may have one source only, or just maybe limited sources. And if one source goes, if they freeze or they stop their funding, then that nonprofit becomes really unsustainable.
Right.
What are some, in terms of diversifying funding streams, what are some of the key funding streams that you see out there that a nonprofit can consider or put in place?
I think that's a great question. And really, it's getting face to face with your board members. There's a
Hmm.
couple of things that you need to just sit down with them and say, what other groups, community groups, Rotary groups, a lot of those, give grants from their foundations. What organizations in our area provide match funding, with employees? What organizations in our community have large grants? You've got the Walmart grants and things like that. What utility companies have grants? Are we doing an awareness campaign where we could capture some information that could help us know what some of these other funding resources might be? The other key component is understanding your donors. So if you are not tracking your donors correctly, you're not going to know who is hearing your message and buying in. And honestly, one of the best things I learned, I was at a class at a community foundation here locally in Georgia. And one of the best pieces of information that a development director said was, if someone gives you a significant gift, whatever size that is for your organization, maybe for your organization, it's $500, maybe it's $1,000, maybe it's $3,000, whatever that significant gift is for your organization, if you don't already have a relationship with them, call them up. And so I've done that. I've called them up and say, hey, we've never met. I'm the executive director for where I'm at now, Jeremiah's Place. And I noticed that you gave such and such. And to me, that is so significant. And would you help me understand, why did you give to us? What are you doing? Or what do you believe about our organization? And then how could I get more people to be like you? And believe it or not, every time I've done that, the folks and the donors are so responsive. I've gotten board members out of that, volunteers out, sustaining donors.
Hmm.
If people are already buying into what you're doing, have that conversation, include them in. They want you to do well. So I would ask them, say, hey, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas? I promise you, it may sound weird, but they're already partnering with you financially, which is often the hardest thing to get, right? So if they're willing to partner with you financially, give them a call. And from that, that's where I found out about other organizations that did matching funding, community foundations, and other things like that, and even other individual donors. So every time you talk to one person, drill down and say, well, who else could I talk to?
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Wow, that's really high level, super specific tactic and technique of how do you take one relationship and turn it into broader and bigger than that initial giving. But it goes back down to having that personal touch, having that one-on-one connection with people, and developing what we talked about earlier, right? Developing, going from know, like to
yeah,
trust.
yeah.
And when that trust is established, the gates open so much more. So let's shift gears a little bit. Now, we talked quite a bit about CASA and some of the things that they've done. They're looking to diversify. For many of you who are you have a nonprofit and you're looking to diversify, there's lots of different options out there. You
Mhm.
can look at, obviously federal, state, local agencies grants. You can look at other nonprofits and they give out grants, NGOs, individual donors. You can look at corporate enterprise. They give out grants.
Can I mention one thing?
Sure.
Because you were talking about that, it reminded me of another thing that I have done in the past too. I've contacted our local county manager or city manager and said, hey, this is where we're at. And this has been all over wherever I've worked in Georgia and other areas, and said, what grant funding might an organization like ours be able to apply for? Because they have access to some of those grant funding opportunities. And I've had them print me lists
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
will go through, and those are unique things. And they will even say, they've even said to me, I'll help you apply for it. I
Hmm.
will provide you county statistics and information. Again, it's that partnership. And they talk to people, talk
Hmm.
to people. You're the one who has the story, you're the one who's passionate about the work you do. And the people in your community are going to want you to succeed. Let them help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Advocates and volunteers comes in many different forms and different shapes, and that's a great way to get other people to really be part of the mission of the organization. So we've shared quite a bit in terms of what CASA did, and some of the adjustments that they're making in light of all the some of their funds getting frozen. And as an organization, you have to be resilient when things change and when things the market adjusts, whether it's through a pandemic or whether it's through budget cuts or whether it's through a big donor leaving. You still have to reposition yourself so that you can grow and thrive in a evolving and changing environment. With that said, some of you need support, you need help, you need resources, and that's the one thing that we've done here at the Government Contractors Association. We've created a community, and I want to share a little about what we're doing inside the community. And then I also want to share a tool, a resource tool that we created so that you can actually have some additional support in what you're trying to accomplish. And so let me share on my, quickly with some of you who may be watching this here for the first time and have not heard about the GovCon community and what we do here. So the GovCon community is a community where we support organizations, for profit and nonprofit. For profit, mainly around going after government contracts, and nonprofit going after grants itself, whether it's grants from federal, state, county, cities, or individual donors. We cover the whole spectrum. And when you come to the community, you come in and you set up your account. You come and you sign up. You introduce yourself to the community. We aggregate different information, so you can come in here and ask the community questions that you may have. You can come and share some of your stories, your success. You can come and share your wins in here, and then you can also come in here and you can attend events. We have events on a about 3 to 4 events every single week. If you join us for the podcast, this is one of the events that we put on a podcast to really expose you to the different techniques and strategies to help your organization to thrive. And then we also have industry events of just different things that's happening in the world of grants and contracts. And then we also have libraries, we have free resources, like how to research 990s for those of you who are grants or nonprofits. And so different resources there, different download content. And you can do all this here. Membership starts at $1. So to join the community, membership starts at $1 to test out the community. And so if you're looking for a organization, looking for a place to call home to where you can come and build community, network, and get resources and get support, whether it's with we talked about reporting and compliance earlier. If you need grant reporting support, if you need proposal writing, grant writings, if you need any of these resources, the community connections to resources or within the GovCon community itself, we provide some of these resources so that you can help, so that you can achieve the goals, the missions of why your organization exists. And so I'll put the link into the chat, and it's very simple. Just go to govcon.community, and then that is where you can do that there. And then we launch a new software. I want to share that with everybody also. The new software is called GovGenie, and we're actually giving out a something really awesome and special for all of you who are watching us on replay or watching us live here. Let me go ahead and log in, and I will show you what that is. Let me and show you what we just launched in here. So within GovGenie, we just launched a module for grants. So if you are looking for grants, you can come in here, you can click on this here, you can click on the grants, and it will help you to navigate all the different grants that's available out there. So, so for example, we've been talking about youth today. So I put in the word youth here, and there are 234 grants that have the word youth in there. Um, Building local continuums of care to support youth success. So different type of grants that's available out there. You can use this here. Now, one thing that GovGenie is building is just launched the grant module. We're going to be building a bid board or a grant board to where you can come in here and you can manage your grants. You can manage your grant and create a pipeline of what you're doing with your grants and creating a tracking the work itself to where you've successfully won those grants and you can actually see. So let me give you an example of a organization. This is for the contract side of it, but we're doing this here for the grant side of it as well. So this is an example of a company that's using GovGenie to support their contract side. And we're building out this module so that you can track your grants as well. So this organization, they're tracking they're drafting their proposals, and they've submitted 42 worth 6.2 million. They won 31 contracts worth 752,000. But so this is what you can do with GovGenie, and we're actually looking for early stage adopters of this here. And for if you are interested in being an early stage user of GovGenie, we are actually giving out something very special, and we're giving all of you early adopters a 50% off of the GovGenie platform, and I'm going to put the link in here, the secret, um, I would say, discount code. So this discount code is Grants and Contracts Podcast 50. It's in the chat. If you save that there, and when you go and set up your GovGenie account, and in the checkout you put that coupon code there, you get GovGenie at 50%, being an early adopter of the GovGenie platform. So with that said, I just have a few quick comments for you, Della. Tell us about the current organization that you're working with, and why you chose to be part of that organization, and what are some of the things you guys are looking to do there.
Thank you. Well, and let me say real quick, I am loving the GovCon community and the GovGenie. As someone who has, otherwise I would have to have 11 spreadsheets open in order to track in that pipeline. That is exciting to me, and I'm ready for that to start immediately. I love the grant section already. So if you haven't tried it, please try it. It's worth every penny. But that's just an insider tip. Back to what I'm doing. I am working again, like I said, with a local ministry, Jeremiah's Place, and we are a transitional housing facility and program in our community. We help people find housing stability, and we literally walk them through. We're not a case manager. We're not their parole officer. We are their friend and their mentor. So we teach them how to budget. We teach them how to have family time. We teach them how to write a resume, everything you would need in order to get. We don't give a handout, we give a hand up, is what we keep saying. And that's kind of what we're doing. And so to do that well, that means I have to have all these other foundational pieces in our organization. So I've told our board of directors and our volunteers one thing. I said, anytime something doesn't go well, or like CASA, when CASA lost the funding, that just reminds us of why we're here, because that's what our clients and that's what the people we serve go through every day, is hardships. And what this does for us is it reminds us why we need to do well. Why don't let any hard times go to waste, because we use those in turn to help our community and to empower them and to give them hope.
So for Jeremiah's Place, do you guys serve mainly the different needs in the North Georgia area, or
We
tell me
do.
about that?
Yeah, we serve those that in our community that are homeless, and we have very limited housing here, so our actual resident numbers will be very low. But what I'm moving toward, what my goal is to really be that repository of knowledge for homelessness and home instability, meaning that if someone calls us, we begin to walk them through, like you talked about the grant pipeline, walking them through a pipeline of what it means to achieve stability. So let's get you in touch with this agency. Let's do this for you. While we may not have room, this is how we can help you find housing stability and get you down the road, and whatever that looks like. So that's my goal, is to increase our program capacity beyond just a roof over the head, but to really get into the community of people, because 50% of the people that we talk to are homeless, but then another 50% are close to being homeless, meaning that, and they're unstable in their housing, meaning that one paycheck means they don't have a place to live anymore. And so we want to really work towards making that difference in our community, to provide that stability within our community and in our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love the work that you're doing with Jeremiah's Place, and that that goes back to the core of the passage from the scripture itself.
Yes, Jeremiah 29:11.
Mm-hmm. And so
And that is where our name comes from.
That's right. And
Future and hope. And so my call to ministry is to just keep pouring into our neighbors, because these are our neighbors that are struggling, into pouring into them so that they can have a home and they can continue to build their life. And this is not their forever station,
Absolutely true. Well, thank you, Della, for joining me in the Grants and Contract podcast today. It's been a joy listening to
Thank
your
you.
journey and all the
Thank
work
you for
you've
the
done.
support all of you provide to us. So thank you guys who engage with us on the community. And I just want to say thank you.
Absolutely. And if you're joining us live, thank you for joining us live. And if you're watching some replay, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the resources. It's in the description area there. And until next week, we've got a awesome podcast plan for next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about the impact of Donald Trump's first 100 day in office and how that has impacted good and bad challenges that has come from that. We'll talk about some new initiatives in terms of contracting opportunities that is a result of the first 100 day of the Trump's administration. Some of the changes that's happened there. We're going to talk about CSO. You want to join us next week so you can learn what CSOs are. Because this is going to be one of the most critical contracting vehicle going forward as it relates to government contracting. We're talking about the changes with GSA. We're going to talk about the budget cuts, how much, what percentage of budget cuts has happened thus far, why that matters to you. We're going to talk about maybe the early stages of the budgets for next year, what that looks like. So we're going to talk about quite a bit of items for next week. So join us next week, same time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Every single week, we're doing the Grants and Contract podcast. With that said, Della, thanks for hanging out with me and all of you joining us. Have a good one, and we'll see you in another episode. Take care.